I placed it on the table without saying a word. A folded piece of paper, small, yellow, the kind torn from a notepad you'd find in any kitchen drawer. I set it down in the middle of a birthday dinner, my grandson's 8th, between the cake plates and the half-empty glasses, in front of my son, his wife, and every single person at that table. Nobody spoke. I watched Derek's face move through 3 expressions in about 4 seconds. Confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked a lot pale. He knew exactly what it was, and now everyone else at that table knew that he knew. I had been carrying that piece of paper in my wallet for 4 months, tucked right behind a photograph of my late wife, Carol. What was written on it? That's exactly what we need to talk about. But to understand what that paper meant and why I chose that particular moment to return it, you have to go back to Christmas morning. If this is your first time here on the Silent Father channel, welcome. Get comfortable. We tell stories about family, about sacrifice, about what happens when quiet people finally draw a line. Now, let me tell you about my son. My name is Ray Doyle, 64 years old, retired electrician. For 29 years I worked the early shift, and I can count on one hand the number of times I called in sick. I'm not saying that to impress anyone. I say it because it's the truest thing I know about myself. I show up. That's always been my way of saying I love you. I'm a widower. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago, a stroke quick and without warning. We raised 2 children, my daughter Patrice, 43, who lives far away, and my son Derek, 39 years old. The one this story is about, I want to be fair to Derek even now. I want you to understand what I gave, not to complain, but so you know what was at stake. When Derek started college, I had no tuition savings built up, but I had a trade and I had weekends. I picked up private electrical contracts after my regular shifts, kitchen rewires, panel upgrades, whatever was available, and over 4 years I put $41,000 toward his education. I never mentioned the amount. When he thanked me once, I told him it was just what fathers do. I meant it. 6 years ago, Derek's credit wasn't strong enough to qualify for the home he and his wife Sandra wanted, so I co-signed the mortgage, put my name on a $230,000 loan. I told myself it was an investment in my grandchildren's future. Then Sandra went back to work, and I started driving 40 minutes each way to watch the kids. 2, sometimes 3 mornings a week. Caleb, who's 8 now, Lily, who's 5. Nearly 3 years of that. I learned that Caleb liked peanut butter without jelly, and that Lily needed her crackers broken into exactly 4 pieces, or she'd push the plate away. I built Caleb a wooden bookcase because he'd started collecting books and had nowhere to put them. I never counted the hours. I never kept an invoice. But I remembered every single sacrifice. The morning Carol died, I could still smell her perfume on the passenger seat headrest. She'd ridden with me to Derek's house the weekend before to help paint the nursery. I've never told anyone that. I just carry it. That's who I am. For a long time I assumed that because Derek never complained, we were fine. I confused the absence of conflict with the presence of love. And I didn't want to hear what my late wife's closest friend Margaret had been trying to tell me. The truth is, I had noticed things. Small things. The kind you talk yourself out of because you'd rather be wrong. Derek was a good boy. I want to say that plainly before anything else. Decent, a little awkward growing up, the kind of kid who apologized when he bumped into furniture. When he was young, he called his mother every Sunday without fail. Carol would light up every time his name appeared on her phone. After she died, the calls came less often. I told myself he was grieving in his own way. Derek was never the kind of person who processed things out loud. Neither was I, honestly. So I gave him room, and I kept showing up the way I always had. Then gradually, things changed. I want to be careful here, because Sandra isn't a simple person to describe. She's organized, driven. She loves Derek in her own particular way. But over the years following the childcare arrangement, I started noticing a quiet shift in how my visits felt. Shorter, more scheduled. My offers to fix things around the house, a sticking door, a flickering light, were met with polite refusals. "We can handle it, Ray." At family dinners, Sandra started asking questions about my future, whether I'd considered downsizing, whether I'd thought about my arrangements, whether I had everything in order for eventually. She always said it with a smile, and I always told myself she was being responsible, practical. I respected practicality. Margaret did not see it that way. Margaret Okafor has been my late wife's closest friend since before Derek was born. Every Thursday we have lunch. She's 68, sharp as a tack, and she does not soften things out of politeness. About 14 months before Christmas, she set down her fork and looked at me directly. "Ray, I don't know how to say this kindly, so I'll just say it. That woman is counting your money before you're done using it." I told her she was being unfair. I told myself she was protective of Carol's memory, reading things into situations that weren't there. I was wrong. About 6 months before Christmas, the Sunday dinners stopped. No explanation. Derek said they were just trying to get organized. I didn't push back. Then one Tuesday, Caleb called me from Derek's house. He was 7 years old. He asked me, very carefully, if Grandpa was mad at them. That question stayed with me for a very long time. And then came Christmas. And the note. I left my house at 7:30 on Christmas morning. 40 minutes to Derek's place, same as always. My toolbox was in the truck bed, the old steel one. Latches that stick, because I always found something to fix when I visited. A loose hinge, a dripping tap, something. That was my way of saying I loved them without anyone having to acknowledge it. Caleb and Lily's gifts were on the passenger seat. On the floor, wrapped in brown paper, was a honey-glazed ham from the butcher Carol, used every December. I was wearing the navy wool sweater Derek had given me 3 Christmases ago. I'd saved it for that morning. None of that was accidental. That was my entire language. Sandra met me at the door with a smile. Derek hugged me briefly. The kids were loud and warm, and Lily held my hand before I'd put the bag down. For 20 minutes, everything felt almost like it used to. Then Derek said, "Dad, come sit down a minute." Sandra stayed standing. I noticed that, though I didn't understand it yet. Derek slid a piece of paper across the kitchen table. Handwritten, torn from a small yellow notepad. At the top it read, "Holiday Accommodation Contribution." I read it once. Then I read it again. It stated that my visits, including the current 3-night Christmas stay, came to approximately $85 per night in household costs, and that going forward, a contribution of $75 per visit night would be appreciated. The note was dated. There was a line at the bottom for my signature. Derek said, "Dad, we just need to be practical. We have a lot of things coming up." He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. I looked at Sandra. She was watching me the way a person watches something they've been waiting for. Not nervous, not embarrassed, patient. And I understood then, with the kind of quiet certainty you feel in your chest, that she had written every word of that note, and that Derek had carried it to this table, because he didn't have the will to refuse her. He'd slid it across like it was a receipt. And in a way, I suppose it was. I set the note down. I picked up my coffee. I took one slow sip. Then I said, "All right, I hear you." I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. Derek's shoulders loosened in slightly. Sandra gave a small, satisfied nod. They both seemed relieved. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't see, was that I hadn't agreed to anything. I drove home that afternoon without the radio on, sat in Carol's chair, took the note out and read it a 3rd time. Then I placed it in my wallet, carefully, right behind the last shopping list Carol ever wrote. I sat with that. What Derek and Sandra didn't know, couldn't know, was that I had spent the last 4 months doing some quiet thinking. My turning point wasn't Christmas morning. It was the previous August, 4 months earlier. I was at Derek's house, watching the kids for the afternoon. Caleb was moving between rooms the way 8-year-olds do. Restless, curious, and at one point he came into the kitchen, carrying a piece of paper pulled from the counter. He held it up like he'd found something interesting. I caught 2 words at the top before he wandered off. Estate valuation. Someone had been looking up the assessed value of my house. I didn't say a word. I drove home that evening and sat with it for an hour. Then I called Margaret. She answered on the first ring. She always does. I told her what I'd seen. There was a pause, the kind that means someone is choosing their words carefully. Then she said, "Ray, I think it's time you talk to someone who knows about wills." She connected me with an estate attorney, a colleague of her late husband's. I had my first appointment the following week, over 3 meetings, August, September, October. I made changes, carefully. I updated my will, removing Derek as primary beneficiary, and dividing that portion equally between Patrice and a bequest to a local electrical apprenticeship program Carol had believed in for years. I changed the beneficiary designation on my retirement account. I confirmed in writing that my house deed had never been altered and remained solely in my name. I paid the legal fees in cash, from savings Derek didn't know existed. Margaret attended the final meeting as a witness and kept her own handwritten record of the dates. I told no one else. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Those are different things. Silence is not the same as agreement. Sometimes silence is just a man who knows when he's not finished yet. I went to Derek's for Thanksgiving. I brought a pie. I behaved exactly as I always had. They noticed absolutely nothing. And then came April and Caleb's birthday dinner. And the moment Derek made one announcement too many. The restaurant was the kind of place families choose for birthdays. Decent food, wide tables, a children's menu with crayons. We had pushed 2 tables together, Derek and Sandra, Caleb beside me, Lily on my other side, the Hendersons across from us, 3 of Derek and Sandra's friends filling the gaps, and at the far end of the table, a laptop open to Patrice and her husband on a video call. It was Caleb's 8th birthday. I watched him tear into wrapping paper like it owed him something. Lily sang the wrong words to Happy Birthday, confidently, entirely wrong, and nobody corrected her because she was 5, and it was perfect. When Caleb leaned over the candles to blow them out, I felt that particular aching love that only grandparents understand. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The first 45 minutes were good, easy. I was almost convinced I'd been carrying something I could eventually put down. Then Derek stood up. He tapped his glass. The table settled. He smiled the smile of a man who believes everything is going according to plan. He talked about a renovation, a second-story addition, an expanded kitchen, and laid out the scope with obvious pride. Then he raised his glass toward me and said, "And we're grateful, we're really grateful, to have my dad on board to help make it happen." The table applauded. I sat with my hands flat on the tablecloth and watched his face. The comfortable smile. The ease of someone who has never genuinely considered that the people he takes for granted might one day simply stop. I waited until the applause ended. Then I said, quietly enough that the table had to lean in, "I appreciate that, Derek. But I think there may have been a misunderstanding. I haven't agreed to contribute to any renovation." The smile held 2 full seconds longer than it should have. Then it began to falter. Sandra spoke first, her voice pleasant and controlled. "Ray, we talked about this." "We had not. I had never been consulted." "I don't believe we did," I said. "But even if we had, I've made some changes recently that I should have mentioned sooner. I sat down with an attorney last fall and updated my arrangements." I paused. I wanted to make sure everything was in order. After Carol, I didn't want to leave things loose. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of yellow notepaper, a photocopy, though nobody at that table knew the original was still in my wallet, and I set it flat on the table in front of Derek. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't explain it. I just said calmly, "I've been meaning to return this." The table went quiet. Mrs. Henderson looked at her daughter. Mr. Henderson looked at his hands. Patrice had leaned so close to the camera that her face filled the entire screen. Caleb was focused on his cake, unbothered and happy. Lily had fallen asleep against Derek's arm. Derek stared at the note. Then he looked at me. The color had left his face entirely. Sandra recovered first. "Ray, this really isn't the place." "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry." I stood. I kissed Caleb on the head. I shook Mr. Henderson's hand and nodded to the rest of the table. No slammed chair, no lingering. I stopped at the front register and paid my portion of the bill. I'd kept it separate from the start, and I walked to my car. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the particular quietness that follows a decision that has been a long time coming. I drove home. I didn't sleep much that night, but not because I was troubled, because I was, for the first time in a long time, finally free. I got home just after 9 that evening. My phone showed 4 missed calls from Derek. I listened to 2 voicemails. The first was him, voice strained, saying we needed to talk. The second was Sandra, careful and measured, asking if I was all right. That particular combination told me everything I needed to know about how the rest of the evening had gone after I left. I didn't call back. Not that night. I made a cup of tea. I sat in Carol's chair. Then I reached into my wallet and took out the original Christmas note. The piece I'd placed on the table had been a photocopy, though nobody at that dinner knew that, and I held it one last time before laying it in the fireplace grate. The fire wasn't lit, but the decision was. 3 days later, Derek knocked on my front door. He stood on the porch like a man who'd rehearsed something on the drive over and lost the words before he could get out of the car. I let him in. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Carol and I had eaten 30 years of ordinary meals, and Derek said the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. "Dad, I don't know when I stopped thinking of you as my dad and started thinking of you as a problem to manage." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said, "That's a start. But things are different now, and I need time." He nodded slowly. He left looking shaken. I made no promises because I had none ready to give. The renovation plan was quietly shelved. Patrice told me weeks later that the contractor deposit had been non-refundable. Derek and Sandra absorbed that loss alone. Sandra stopped attending extended family gatherings for several months. Scheduling conflicts, the message said. The people who had been at that birthday dinner didn't need any explanation from me. They had been there. They had seen the yellow notepaper on the table. They drew their own conclusions the way decent people do. Patrice flew out a few weeks after that. First visit in 2 years. She stayed a long weekend, and we went through some of Carol's things together. Boxes we'd both been avoiding. I showed her the updated will. She cried, and it wasn't about the money. It was because she understood what it had cost me to sit in that attorney's office and make those decisions without telling a soul. The following Thursday, Margaret came for lunch. I told her the whole story, start to finish. She listened without once interrupting. When I was done, she reached across the table and covered my hand with both of hers. She said quietly, "Carol always said you were the patient one." That was the closest I came to tears throughout any of this. Things are different now. I go to Derek's house when Caleb and Lily ask for me. I don't stay overnight. The toolbox stays home. The relationship is smaller, but it's honest. And the old one never was. I have Thursday lunches with Margaret, mornings in the garage, monthly calls with Patrice. I sleep better than I have in 4 years. I'm 64 years old. I have time left. And for the first time in years, I'm spending it the way I want to. If you've stayed with me this long, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. I made mistakes in this story. I ignored warnings. I told myself that loyalty had to be unconditional, even when it was being handed back to me as a bill. I confused keeping the peace with keeping the family together. For a long time, I didn't understand that those are two very different things. What I eventually learned is this: love is not the same as tolerance. Giving is not the same as agreeing to be taken from. And when a parent has to choose between their own dignity and their child's comfort, the child has usually already made their decision long before that moment arrives. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you've been in a relationship with a son, a daughter, an in-law, a sibling, where you were the one holding everything up, where the only reason the structure was still standing was because you hadn't walked away from it yet. If that's you, I want you to know that what you've been carrying is real, and you're not wrong for feeling the weight of it. Setting a limit is not cruelty. It is respect for yourself and, in the end, for the person you're setting it with. I think about Margaret, about Patrice, about Caleb calling me on a Tuesday just to ask if I was okay. Loyalty doesn't always come from the people you expected it from. Sometimes it comes quietly from the people who simply kept showing up the same way you always had. Some doors close slowly. You barely notice until the day they don't open anymore. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever been the one who gave more than you were ever thanked for, I'd like to hear from you in the comments. What did you do? What do you wish you'd done sooner? Tell me. And if this story found its way to you today, you're welcome here. There are always more.